Hello and welcome to Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and that means that we are done with work and we're on to talking Dungeons and Dragons. As we often are, I am Rob, aka Lantern Noir, one of your two hosts for Happy Hour this week. My pronouns are he and him, and hopefully you are finding an appropriate way to celebrate Pride Month with kicks off today. We keep having Tuesdays land on amazing
No.
days. And speaking of amazing, I will allow him to introduce my amazing co-host.
Graybeard Tavern, and I usually sport the old rainbow back there, just to let people know we care.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Which I am, unfortunately, I am coming to you live from Barovia, and as such, there are no rainbows because it's Barovia, and that's not that they are homophobic or anti-bi. They're just Barovian.
Well, and you've got a long, and as I do, you've got a long history. You are more ensconced in Barovian lore and whatnot than I. And
Am I?
I think so, man. You've run it a lot more than me. I have maybe run it once or twice. I know I ran it once when it came out originally in late 80 something.
86, I think, is the year.
That sounds correct. Yeah, that would have been about right. Yeah, and that's I ran it when it first came out, and then I used parts of it in campaigns over the years, but yeah, you're there. You're ready to do it again, and a current run of said Ravenloft goodness.
I literally am doing it again, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Not entirely sure why, but I am. So how has your week been? Let's kick off with the week in gaming for us.
So no, we didn't have masks.
Mm-hmm.
Then we didn't have grognards. So then, that puts us all the way into Sunday. My Twitch stream, we did. We took care of the character that I love to hate. His name is Smith, but he's like a big frog person with tentacle eyes. He looks like Hammerhead from Star Wars, and that's the race he is in Grifflands. And I at the last minute, I could have killed my sister because he's a bad person, and removed her from the plot, which is 2 of 3 siblings. I've got the 3rd sibling where maybe one more session if things go right, and we take on the eldest brother. We convinced our youngest sibling that we can make amends, and and the middle sibling and I failed. I lost. She's all angry with me. The revolution is all angry with me, and now I have to face my oldest brother. I think it's the oldest brother. And like I said, it was partially my fault. I should have been more Smith-like and less GB-like, and taken her out. Just assassinated my sister. But I had to try. Yeah, anyway,
it's interesting you bring that, because it does seem to be a very common trope when you want to create tension in a horror-like setting. Mm-hmm. Harm to siblings rockets to the front of that list of things to throw at people.
Yeah. When I played with Wings was running it. Danae Keener, DanaeKeener.com. She was running it in Indoor and LB. They were playing siblings, and they were not from Barovia, and so they were nobles, and they were loud. And my character Stetchen, he would burst in when they were having a discussion and say things like, "Shh, there are vampires. You must be quiet."
They will hear you.
Exactly.
And come after us.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. So that gets you through Sunday morning and then to today?
Yeah, and then you just I don't know how to vacation well. I'm on vacation. I'm taking the week off, and Saturday Saturday I like cleared brush and blew leaves and raked and mowed and just I worked hard. Like I was tired at the
You
end of the day.
vacationed like a dwarf.
Yes, exactly. And then Sunday I streamed. Then I played Zweihander with the English crew. We hadn't played in like a month because of Mother's Days being off between England and America and stuff. So we got to back into it and we got to play again. And the my my character was he basically he saw a horror that had affected him in a way, and he had been like a melancholy. He had become like a doomsayer type person. Everything was, we're all gonna die anyway. Well, this session is the second to last session, and the doom has been lifted. So finally, my big happy Viking can be a big happy Viking again. And so, but I mean, it's like months and months of sessions where he's been this like gloom and doom. It doesn't matter, we all gonna die anyway, so anyway, yeah, so that's my week in gaming, and now I'm here with you.
Yeah, well, let's see. Last week we Wednesday night, my Candlekeep group, which is no longer a Candlekeep group, continued their adventures in Dark Realm, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away for. Well, actually, I kind of do because I'm so proud of them. But I put the monk in a position to decide whether or not they were going to run back in and defend the village when they had previously in their backstory had said they had abandoned it, and that has been haunting them to this day, that they had run away in the face of this massive attack from Dusk Elves, and it was really, really dramatic because the party split on the issue. Yeah. The bard's like, no, this is all in our heads. This isn't really happening. And they're like dragging the monk out, and they're starting into PvP with each other.
Oh no!
And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna tamp down this a little bit.
Yeah.
Like it's not. There's no dice against each other. If Lunaria says her character's running back into town, that is their decision as the player. And then the party split. Our barbarian went back in with the monk, and the rogue, who's had this on and again, off again flirt with the bard, stood by the bard. And I had the chance. It was freaky crazy, but I actually looked right in the camera and said, "Okay, Lunaris, Jansen will die now. Tell me how she goes down."
Yeah.
And they fought to the death, and then that's when the dark energies took over and went, "Okay, you're not dead yet, but I haven't told you what's happening, and I won't until next week." And as luck would have it, we get to play again this week.
Oh, sweet.
So I'll talk that up again at that back end when we talk about what's coming up. But that was my Wednesday, and that was like super high emotion. I did not stream Friday night because I went over to a friend's house for a board game night. We are all safely vaccinated. We got together and we played Wingspan. And then Saturday night we had no power, so I couldn't do my usual.
Wingspan.
Wingspan is a board game of engine building and set collection.
Huh.
Interesting. It's the best way I would describe it.
Is it like airships or?
No, it's birds. Literally just birds. You're collecting birds, and they're all real birds. Okay. And the cards all use things like what their nesting situation is like. Do they build large nests or small nests? Are there little quirks to that particular breed of bird or species of bird that makes it a little bit different than others? How do we work that game mechanically in? Yeah. It's a really neat little game. I call it like competitive solitaire. Because there's very little player interaction. The only interaction you have with other players is competing for the visible cards that are available in the bank, and then there's also a component of some of my cards might be triggered by things that happen on your turn.
So in my head I was like, oh, this sounds like evolution, but only birds. But it's not.
It's not really evolution. No,
you're not trying to eat each other, or
no, but it's way more hands off than evolution.
Oh, okay.
But it's still a very neat game. It's very easy to learn. Like as they would say on Sit Down and Shut Up, the teach is very short. or is very easy. I think that's the phrasing they're going for. The house to teach. The teach is easy.
Which is easy.
So yeah, that was Saturday night, Friday night. Saturday night, we had no power. We actually packed up my wife's computer because she had to work. She had to work, and took over to my parents' house. And I kept joking that I should have brought mine, and I could have just done like a just chatting stream. And if I'd been smart, I would have, because I would drag my mother onto it and said, "You're just going to have some alcohol and talk."
Right.
And that probably would have made me partner that day. That's just all there would have been to that. But and then Sunday night we continued with Curse of Strahd, and they're continuing to make their way around the town of Valaki. And my Barovian Vistani accent, it's not there yet, but I'm getting better and better.
All right.
I think. I have a couple of sound replacements. That's as good as it gets.
Yeah, well, so, and then you vary it up with pitch and tone for people, and that kind of thing.
Hey, Toe, welcome aboard. Glad to have you in our chat. How do we feel about monster character players? Pin it.
Okay.
We are definitely going to come back to that question after we get through our review, because I feel like that's a good conversation to have. And we'll see how the review goes. If we don't get to it this week, we will absolutely talk about it next week, because I think next week is our mailbag week. This is episode 21. This is the episode we become legal. And that's a good one to talk about, because I have strong opinions on that. Not least of all happened recently on Twitter. But that was my week in gaming. And we agreed this week we wanted to go after the question, should you pick up Von Richten's Guide to Ravenloft? And that's really what we're here to talk about today. My experience with the Ravenloft campaign setting, as we talked about earlier, I started running the module as a second edition D&D module back in 87. I think was the first time I sat down and ran it, 87 or 88. Yeah, around there. And I keep running it off and on with different groups. And I kind of feel like any group of gamers I'm with, I need to run through Ravenloft at least once.
Right.
Like that's just part of the rite of passage. And you said you just recently completed a campaign of it.
Yeah, I was a guest star, but they have indoors production and stuff is top notch, and they always run a good game over there. So it'd be worth watching. I show up in 4 episodes, and there's dynamic changes and twists and turns. Much akin to the way you write. For starters, they made Strahd female in their campaign, and it was really it was a lot of fun. I played a knowledge cleric. He was a student of Von Richten, because I think it was late second, early third they put out a Von Richten's Guide back then, and so I was all, I'm gonna be his student. That'll be amazing, because basically I based the character on Heath Ledger from Brothers Grimm, Heath Ledger's character from Brothers Grimm, and Van Helsing from the Bram Stoker's movie version of Dracula. So a little loony, a little reserved, a little quiet, believes in magic and everything else. And being a knowledge cleric was all kinds of fun. Oh, and I had the haunted background. So he was constantly like, "Oh, shut up, I know," talking to no one and stuff. And they were the people of his village who died. And he couldn't save them. So then his was a revenge quest, and blah,
he has
blah, blah.
since been haunted.
Yes.
Well, actually, you shared the picture with me. I hope you don't mind. I threw it up here on the stream.
Oh, awesome.
This is Richten and Arabelle, I believe.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's artwork I had commissioned. Yeah, at one point, Indoor played Arabelle for a while in a couple sessions, and that was really interesting because she was, in this take of it, she was actually like a powerful magic user. So, was she a magic user or a cleric? Anyway, she had like augury and that kind of stuff, and she could do things with her cards, and cast spells with them and stuff. And Indoor's a huge Magic the Gathering fan, so he was all about using cards to cast spells and whatnot. So, um,
I
yeah,
might
that
have to work that in. Another thing, because the Arabelle I currently have in the game I'm running is just I just made a divine sorcerer
mm-hmm.
and went okay here. And unfortunately, because they don't have any magic weapons yet,
Yeah.
she's kind of sticking out as a bit of a powerhouse. Like they're 6th level, she's only 4th,
Right.
but she hits like a freight train still. Especially compared to them, is what they're like, ooh, polka-da, non-magic weapon. She's like, oh, here's 3d8 fireball. Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah, I have to watch it because I'm running the risk of falling into the NPCs are cooler than the PCs, and that's a road you really got to avoid as a DM. So, all right, so let's talk Van Richten.
All right.
First impressions. What did you think? What was your first thought? You started skimming through it, like, before we get into the nitty gritty.
So absolutely gorgeous.
That's right. They put Ez on the cover.
And then the funny part is I took a picture in Discord, sent it out or whatever, and then for whatever reason I hadn't looked, but the back is also like amazing artwork.
That is gorgeous.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And again, I usually get, what ends up happening is I always get one that's like this, and I should put it in a Mylar bag and seal it away because, I'm like that. And then I usually end up getting a second one for the table that can get dog-eared and bitten and gnawed and, orange soda spilled on it and all that. So, but yeah, we haven't had a home game and a real sit at the table with people since the plague began. So, we'll see.
You have some time before you need to worry about that Mylar coating.
Yeah. So far, so good. It'll be a while. Though it gets to go in with the books that I actually can look at, because all the modules I have that I want to play or have, was going to be a player in that I've never cracked. So I've got like an entire shelf of D&D content that the spines are still absolute and they're never been opened.
That's the one perk, I suppose, to being the perpetual DM, is that I never think, well, I better not read this in case someone runs it.
Yeah.
There's like 0 chance of that.
Yeah.
And if there is, it's so rare I can go, I don't think I've read that in a while. Yeah, go for it. Go for it. I will say one of my first impressions was D&D Beyond needs to work on their app. That was like one of my first, as I was trying to do some work on it this weekend to prepare for today. And the D&D Beyond app is terrible for reading your source books. That's still there is. It's just bad.
Now, are you saying the like on computer or like on phone?
I was on my phone.
Yeah.
And it just stupid little things like return to table of contents or turn page doesn't exist. You can't just go to the next section. You have to go back to the table of contents and then find where you are. And it was a real pain in the butt because, as mentioned, power outages. So I think, well, I got my phone. I'll just do some prep work for Tuesday and get ready for this review. But after that, there's just a lot of stuff in here. And it was really neat to start to get into and play around with and see what they provided. Do you want to go by chapter and kind of talk about what we get and what we like and don't like? Or do you have another idea?
No, that's great. The big thing for me was, I think that, that's kind of an end cap. Okay, let's go chapter by chapter.
Oh no, don't hold us in suspense. Put it out there.
Well, it's one of those things where I think it's more of a DM book. than a player book. It really, but I think it was time for that because Tasha's was so, 22 subclasses and was such a player's book that this is definitely leaning. If I was a player, I wouldn't buy the book. I would D&D beyond the bits I want out of it.
That's I think that's where I think we're going to end up in a very similar place when we're done talking. Chapter 1 gives us character creations, and it's pretty chock full of just ways to build a character that are unique to the domains of dread.
Yeah.
The whole category on the haunted hero, and just like really, I think some neat setup here for players to come into the game. Like, okay, you want to make a character in a Ravenloft setting? Well, let's talk about what that means.
Right.
Right down to this laundry list of, hey, your DM's running horror. Here's some do's and do nots.
Right. I think too that it really, horror is probably the hardest thing to get buy-in to with normal players. I mean, unless you've got people who are really role play-y and really into the scene, all it takes is one clown on at the table and horror becomes really hard to pull off. So, I mean, the horror systems that are out there, I mean, they went to a Jenga tower for the game Dread to add some tension to it, because it's really easy to detach as a player and just be like, nah, I'm not scared. No, I don't care. I refuse to believe the law rocket bounces off of Cthulhu, that kind of thing. So, so yes, it takes buy-in. And I think they did a pretty good job of saying, hey, this is, here's session 0. Things are going to be spooky. This is the way it's going to be. Prepared to be scared. Yeah, prepare to be scared. It's in the first chapter there. It's like a heading.
Yeah, that sounds prepare to be scared. I really like too this habits of horror heroes, and although I take exception, they make the note here, limit comedy.
Nope.
And I think if you have the right group, comedy becomes essential to horror.
Okay.
In certain groups, I mean, like Ghostbusters is a scary movie. Like, there's a lot of things in it that should terrify you. But it's also a comedy.
You're right.
And
right.
I think that's a very specific genre. So I take a little exception to that. Plus, my Curse of Strahd game is basically Ghostbusters meets Ravenloft.
That's what you said.
So like I kind of have to lean on it. But I think there's a lot of good stuff in here about, especially the idea of this: enjoy the struggle. You're going to fail once a lot, and that's a good thing because it makes the story more interesting. And that's such a hard thing. We are so conditioned with gaming that it's all about winning. It's about figuring out how to pull off the roll to do the awesome thing, when so much of the story is driven by the failures along the way.
Right.
And it's a very challenging thing to get across to players unless you mechanically incentivize it.
Yeah.
And then we've got this lineage system, which then leads into these alternate races and lineages, which is a really new mechanic.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Okay.
Unless I'm mistaken, this is the idea of you were one race, and now something has happened to change you via your lineage into this hybrid race.
Right. Well, and it's so very Ravenloft too, because it's the who was more of a monster, the monster or the man? It's just of the genre. It just lends itself to that whole you know, Frankenstein, Shelley, writing style of,
Mm-hmm.
what is the scarier creature?
Yeah, and well, they bring Frankenstein right in here with the reborn uh,
Yeah.
lineage of, you're a creation of something else. You've died, or you're a repossession, or you're the monster itself brought to life as a conglomerate of parts. They really lean heavily on that as a possible thing to play with, which I thought was kind of neat. But I also found like the mechanics a little bit like less than. There's not a lot of mechanics here. It's a lot of like interesting ideas.
Well, and I think I think you said it about Tasha's at some point. You said something along the lines of, you know, hey, if you're letting a player, sorry, if you're letting a player dig into Tasha's, just pretty much expect it to be kind of broken. and, and and I think they reined that back in here, or at least what I've seen, because it's like, um, like the vampires. Oh, you don't have to breathe. I, you know, there's, like you said, there's not a lot of like, oh, new stuff. Like, okay, since your damn fear, you have blood points and you can spend them to heal yourself, and there's not a lot of crunch, a lot more fluff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, in some ways I'm kind of like glad for it, because it's inspirational,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not really mechanical.
Right.
So it feels like a lot of that. One of the things I would worry about bringing into it at the table is, especially with newer players, is going through and going, well, I saw this on my character sheet. What's it mean? Well, it means this cool thing. How do I use that? You just tell me you're doing a cool thing, and it's cool.
Right.
And then chapter 2 is I believe it's chapter 2 is Dark Gifts,
Mm.
which is more of that flavor stuff.
Right.
The idea of having a living shadow, and they've got some mechanical things in it. But again, yeah, it's really very flavory and less crunchy.
Right. Right. Jump in there. Jump in there now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Okay. See, I'm dyslexic, so a lot of times images are like the thing for me. I'm like, oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you see the picture of the tiefling
Yeah.
with the mirror, and you're like, oh.
Well, and what I took from this was hey, everyone who's ever played a warlock, um, you should maybe point your DM at this in the hopes that they, kind of make your patron more
Dark.
Yeah.
Dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some really neat ideas to play with. I do think it's interesting how much D&D still seems to rely on random tables.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would ever roll randomly to see what gets assigned unless I was really stumped.
What when Xanathar's Guide to Everything came out,
Mm-hmm.
what we did at our table was, because we had characters that had already been being played for quite some time, we took them and we said, okay, everybody, let's roll on these tables, and then we kibitzed and talked and went back and forth about it, because it was just something for all of them to roll and go, oh, hey, yeah, why doesn't my fighter have some heraldry, or who was his mentor?
Yes.
It's those questions that you should, ask about yourself. And the ones in Xanathar's were very thought provoking.
Yeah, and those are neat. I think, but this is different because these are like your soul's echoed by a thing. What is it? And then you roll, and it's like, oh, you were spiritually merged with another being, which is really different than time fractures around me, and I sometimes collide with past and future. Like, those are so different flavor-wise
Right.
that I wouldn't, as a DM, I wouldn't leave that up to chance. I'd either go, I can work with this as like the overarching writer, or, hey, which one do you think you should have as my
Yes.
co-writer? I can see some tables it's like, oh, I don't know, just roll for me. But I don't know.
No, this is definitely these are big enough to they are big enough story elements, even if their mechanics aren't anything like, what was the one of them gives you mage hand.
Yes.
And the shadow, grasping shadow or whatever it is. And I think that's these are more about story. These are cool things. Like back in second edition, I created a bard who was like a goth poet, and his big thing was unseen servant. And he would do shows, and then like a skull would float across the room to him, and the unseen servant would wear a cloak and come shambling out, and that kind of stuff, where he used his magic in his shows that way. And I think that a lot of this is that sort of thing, to where people can describe these cool images, straight from Bram Stoker's, where he's, the vampire walks this way, but his shadow crosses the room the other way, that kind of stuff.
And I will say, I'm excited having seen these, I'm excited to use this as a reference to go back to, because I think I could find myself doing this, especially with the one character who's been haunted, and the idea of maybe their demons are gone, but now they're shadows doing funky stuff to make you wonder, are the demons really defeated? And hey, Gooey Juice, welcome aboard. Jessie is on tomorrow night. She will be playing with us tomorrow night for sure. But Tuesdays, it's me and Gray doing happy hour, just having a drink and talking D&D. And this week we're talking about what we like and don't like about Von Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. And third tier, glad to see you popping in there, Mr. Lurker. So yeah, this is some neat stuff. The next chapter gets us into subclasses. Now we get to some crunch.
Yes.
By the way, I'm working my way through I believe this is the Sam Adams Citrus Summer brew, and you are, my sir, imbibing.
It's actually pomegranate green tea with watermelon liqueur, and it's just got a very spring summer. We've got all the windows open. It's heading in the realm of mint julep, as it were. It's the kind of
word.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing you can sit upon the veranda and sip for a while.
You Northerners have the weirdest ways to avoid just drinking a good mint julep.
Exactly. Exactly.
My stars.
My stars.
We actually, I think my bard on Wednesdays did take College of Spirits. I think. Because of all the ominous sides of it, and
right.
That bard in particular is really rough. Dark liqueur, I'll drink it. Not very often though. I'm not usually into the liqueurs, but there's some neat stuff here. Although again, this is what's weird. The random table again. So for like the College of Spirits bard has the Tales from Beyond college feature, where you think of a story. You roll on the table to see which story you get. And then based on it, you can then apply that later. So it's like a randomly generated one-shot spell with your bardic inspiration die, which is kind of cool.
I'm re-looking at the crunch parts. I think that okay, here's the thing. It would be too powerful if you let people choose.
Because then they're good at finding that they're going, oh, this is the one I need for this. Well, but then what about, not to second guess too much. I'm sure this is play tested extensively. But give us a DC to get the spell, to get the story you want.
Right. Right.
Something like that to kind of help uh, flesh it out a little bit. I think it's kind of cool though, because I can also see. I keep scrolling past this. I should leave it up here for a bit. I can also see someone like thinking of the story and kind of keeping in the back of their mind is is this the time to use it? Is this the time to use it? Is this the time to use it? Crunchy wise, and then of course we have our warlock with an undead patron. So having Strahd himself as your warlock patron.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And the crunch of this was pretty good. I thought very, very uh very theme oriented, the spell list.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing is that whenever you have theme spells, a lot of times by the time that they're like cool, you're too high a level for it to be like, oh cool. I don't know. I always feel like the spell list, because of the spell levels, and you're going to be probably 2 to 4 levels actually higher in the game than the spell level. Like, for instance, Phantom Steed would be amazing at, like, when you're 3rd level, but because you won't get that until
like
you're 6th level, it just kind of loses its punch. Speak with Dead, again, if you got Speak with Dead at 3rd level, that would be like a thing, that would be cool. But again, you're not going to get it till 6th. So I guess, I don't know. I've always felt that way with spell lists. Yeah, I did. That's been a thing forever, that spells, that spell level and character level are not conjoined.
Yeah, and that's the thing that the Dungeons and Dragons has wrestled with for generations of writings.
Mhm.
That I'm very surprised 5th edition didn't roll out a different spell power labeling system, so that you are a 6th level wizard, which means you now have access to 3rd circle spells.
Or something.
Because that's usually how I describe it to people. I'm 6th level. Can't I cast anything off the 6th level list? I was like, no, no, but I'm 6th level. Yes, but they've never. I mean, and that's why I usually talk about it as circles, because it's just easier to explain to people. These are totally different mechanics, and even something like in this, I mean, you get your. I feel like it would be kind of cool to see 1 or 2 of these shifted up a level because of the patron, which might mean going back and rewriting or balancing some of the previous, just to create some chances for things to be a little like Speak with Dead. You sold your soul to an undead patron, an undead greater fiend. You should get a little more bang for the buck, other than free access to something,
right?
Which granted, I think it's generally a cleric's. Well, it's necromancy, so I think it's already in the wizard's book list. Speak with Dead.
But I think for some reason in my brain it's telling me that it's a 4th level spell. But after 5 editions, it gets a little muddled up there. Real quick, something I wanted to say about the bards. One of the things, whenever I play a bard, I always create a spell, not a spell, a song or story list, like his oh my god, it's got all
his repertoire.
Thank you.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, to throw out the French. His song list, his repertoire, his standing work. And so I always like to, even though I cannot sing, I love to play bards. And so a lot of times I will, I'll say, oh, he goes into his rendition of, A Knight's Tale or whatever. And I try to keep a running song list. And I think that is something that they could do, particularly in that the Bard of Souls there with those stories. that once something's on the list, like once you've rolled it, maybe it's easier to recall that tale again if you wanted to use it. It was just a crunchy bit that as we passed by, I was like, oh yeah, say something about that.
Yeah, and again, that's the kind of thing where it's like I have to wonder. I know they say a lot with the splat books that you should not assume they're heavily play tested.
Right.
And I have to wonder if this is the kind of thing that at the table, how much things like that would break. Where it's like, no, there's a DC, call it 15, where if you get it, you get to pick the story you come up with off the list. If you don't, then you just get a random story you recall it. What it's like, because it, and you know how that goes. You're like trying to remember that one time in high school that you gave that girl in front of you the short story that she needed for a creative writing class, because you know you really want to tell that story. But you get stuck on the fact that there was that other girl that time when you were in the musical that you were paired to dance with, and she couldn't stand you, so she had to look like she was into you when she wasn't. And you can't get that story out of your head, and you're trying to remember the first one.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, like that kind of a thing. Was that too much of a stroll down amnesia lane?
It was beautiful. It was absolutely a little French window opening into the past,
into 11th grade Lantern Noir.
exactly it.
Yeah. The next chapter is more crunchy for characters, which is the backgrounds. So there's some new backgrounds to play around with, some new elements that you can add into a previously written background. So these are the background features, which is I think neat to include, like some more. Hey, this is kind of a neat idea to work with, play around with it. Some really neat stuff to think on. And again, help you just kind of like think about all. Hey, Reflector, glad to have you here. All the different things you can work in. He knows all the high school stories. He was there for him.
Got it.
And many,
you summoned him.
I've summoned him. But just a lot of really kind of neat inspiration is the way I look at this. So just things to kind of go into and say, what are some fun things I can play with?
Yeah, I mean, some of these have shown up in other books.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I didn't give these much.
Well, I think Haunted One is from other books too. I think they just fleshed it out a bit more.
Yep. Yeah, I love the Haunted One. I have played probably at least 3, possibly 4 characters with the Haunted One background. So it's just such good role play opportunity.
It is. And there's some neat stuff in here, like this your first case as an investigator. It's kind of a neat, like, hey, when did you get into this gig?
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, the artwork, I forgot about that picture. That picture looks like my buddy PB. PB, if you ever see this or listening, look, you're in the book.
Is that the investigator considers the evidence?
Yeah. Looking at the little lantern.
Mm-hmm. There's some really neat, even just online, they brought a lot of the good artwork through. I've also liked the official inquiry feature as something that I'd like. I'm surprised it took them this long to bring it out because I haven't seen it before, which is the idea of you just have a knack for saying, no, I'm supposed to be doing this. It's all through proper channels. And people tend to go, okay. Like, that's a thing.
This is one of my absolute favorite things for a character. Back in the golden days, or the beginnings, the golden age of online gaming, which were called MUDs, multi-user dungeons.
Yes.
Yeah, they were all text-based, but you could play with people online from all across the world.
It was nuts.
And it was all text-based, and I played Sam, a simple man in simple clothes. And and everyone just saw that description and always assumed I was whatever they were, right? And so Sam used to get into, the wizards would come along and be like, oh, we're having a meeting, come on. And so I'd follow them and then I'd be in the wizards meeting. Or the time I followed along and got into the Rogues Guild. And I'm I'm standing in the rogue's treasure room, like, snatch, 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 and I'm grabbing stuff, and all of a sudden this big warrior time lord or something, I can't remember his name, comes in. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "What are you doing here, fighter type? Warrior time lord kind of thing." And he's like, "My other character is the leader of the Rogues Guild." And I'm like, "Great, whoosh, gotta go."
I got a thing.
I got a thing, got a wizards, I'm out, So I love the kind of thing where the incognito. Of course I'm supposed to be here. That's just such a beautiful thing. I take it whenever it is the mechanic in a game, or I try to. In Cypher System, my character had that, where he would dress like a janitor or whatever and walk into every place.
Nobody ever questions the help.
Nope.
That's the key to every good heist movie.
Yes.
Somebody dresses up as the help.
Yep.
So that was all chapter 1. Mm-hmm. Chapter 2, which I think we're going to go through a lot faster, especially for the number of non DMs that might be interested to know what's going on. But as a DM, there's like a really nice set of like flow charts to follow, checklists to create a domain of dread.
Yes.
And a lot of really good ideas that you want to be able to come back to use as writing inspiration.
Yeah.
So they do a really neat job of like talking about the idea of there being a single entity that's created the domain of dread, and that's going to be the linchpin that pulls it together. Now let's talk about how that creates a horrific setting.
For instance, I ran a 3 different game crossover section for a Halloween one time, where it was actually a D&D game, basically like a Fate game, and I think it was another D&D game, and it was 3 different games, and they had crossover elements. And so I created a realm of dread and a dreadlord who was, I should have grabbed the mask. Basically, I got this really amazing pumpkin head mask. And so this dreadlord was like this pumpkin guy who, he's all about your nightmares and your fears and things like that. And yeah, it was a nice linchpin to even play across systems, because you still had those same elements, those same horror elements, and that character, the Dark Lord, who created the realm, his paradigm, it's created. Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street, those guys, they are so evil that an entire realm has formed around them, the Nightmare Lands or stuff like that. I think that's really where the book shines.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really does give a GM enough rope to like not hang himself, but to expand and expound in a way that is it's really well written, I think.
Yeah, this is like, I mean, I sometimes I think one of my running questions has been, is it worth putting the money down for the book versus just reading a good blog article? And this I think is where this is the chapter that really makes the investment in having the reference material on hand 24/7 really valuable as a writer. Yeah. Because one of the things I go back to, and this thing under past life for creating your Dark Lord, this whole subset of Dungeons and Dragons owes some of its existence to Tracy Hickman's writings and Laura Hickman's writings, his spouse and partner, because they were confronted with a vampire and they were forced to go, oh crap, why is this vampire in this dungeon? This makes no sense. Take it easy, Reflector. Glad you could drop by. And they sat down and wrote a module where they didn't just say, here's the vampire at the end of the module. They gave that vampire a really, really rich a backstory that went on to be a campaign setting, that went on to appear in every edition since, that went on to become, they did the novelization of his journal.
Yeah.
Where they told the entire story of Strahd in prose. And I've often like flirted with the idea of telling my players, well, here you go, guys. You got to read the book. You found Strahd's journal. Here it is, all 200 pages of it. Good luck.
Exactly.
Let me know how many long rests you intend to take with it, because you're going to have to check the book out for me.
Right.
Because it's so well written and so rich. But what's neat here is they really start to get you going. Like, if you want to pull this off for yourself, you can do it. But this is the kind of work that goes into creating these really good, believable villains that people love to hate.
Right.
Or hate to love.
And that's what creates that conflict. I mean, your zombie lord from your other campaign, where they were like, ooh, can they, is there a redemption arc available? You know,
that moment where you go, but the zombie lord makes a compelling point.
Right. Exactly.
It's like, ooh, I'm not supposed to have those moments. I'm a good guy. But there's so much here that it's like, there's not a lot of like crunch to debate, because it's about, for lack of better phrasing, steps, checklists.
Yeah.
Have you thought about these things? Have you fleshed this out? Have you considered this? And part of that horror setting is that a villain that you hate to love a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and if they weren't dark and brooding and sad boys, they wouldn't be Lords of Dread. I mean, there is there is such a huge difference between Halloween, the movie, Michael Myers, yank yank, it's big butcher knife, yank 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 yank, versus something where it's, I stab at thee with the divine blade, and it is anointed with my own blood. There's such big story difference there, and it's so much better to have the Dracula love story, and they're doing this for love, or they are doing this for truth, or they are doing this for science, or they're doing this for hatred, not just, oh, I'm evil. I'm trying to kill you to kill you. No, I'm 4 souls away, collecting 4 more souls, and I can unlock the gate that allows great Cthulhu to to purge the world of your stupidity.
Remember again, Ghostbusters, they were calling forth Gozer to demolish the world. I mean, it's a shtick.
Yep.
And it works for a reason. The next chapter is on the genres of horror, which we're going to kind of zip past, because it's in that category of just lots of great questions and lots of interesting points to bring up for to inspire your writing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And to kind of point where you want to go. Do you want to do Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp, or do you want, and Christopher Walken, or do you want to do Brothers Grimm, or do you want to do De Pacte de Lupus, Brotherhood of the Wolf, where there's like kung fu and crazy inventions and stuff, but yet, oh my God, I got goosebumps, dark horror. You're like, oh, what is going on? The twists and turns, it's really good. Like you said, writing fodder, mental exercises to go, where do we want to go, and how's this next chapter going to reflect?
I think one of the things I would take away from this particular chapter is, if you are in any way, shape, or form involved in creative writing, you want to be a writer, and you want to write within the horror genre. This feels like it's a chapter written for you, because it's not locked into running a D&D game.
Right.
It's a collection of ideas about creating horror, creating suspense, creating anxiety, creating tension. And that tension doesn't have to be at a game table. It can be before the reader turns to the next page. And not all horror has to be gross out horror. I'll be honest, the movie that has wigged me out more than any movie I've ever seen is Gone Girl. And that's the one where it's this psychological thriller where she like does this crazy stuff involving a potential murder, but not. And there's a lot of identity changing, and there's a lot of like, okay, but now I'm that. And it's just at the end, I'm like, I am profoundly uncomfortable with my existence now.
Oh, girl, writing it down.
Yeah, brilliant film. I can't say a ton about why it was so horrifying without spoiling it.
Right. Yep.
But it's based off of a book, which again, big popular thriller,
Right.
but it's a psychological thriller.
Right.
So a lot of really neat stuff in here about writing hooks to help pull you along.
Yeah, you gotta give your sad boy somewhere to some reason and place to be who he is.
Yeah. The next chapter is on the domains of Ravenloft, which starts us down, getting into some of the traditions of the Ravenloft setting.
Yeah.
And how to use these in other domains of dread. The idea that these domains exist on their own planes. They're surrounded by the mists, which is I used when I started writing the Mists of Ever Twilight. I was thinking in terms of, well, this is Ravenloft, but not. So I was already kind of going in this direction of creating my own mini domains of dread, each one with its own little moral challenge. And so they kind of start to go through some of these ideas to use that are kind of have become over the years part of the stock in trade of the Ravenloft settings.
Yeah. Original Ravenloft was just a place to add to your campaign. And then eventually Barovia sort of popped up and became a thing. And then they were like, well, how can we do this? Because, it's the tech and the time and everything's a little, most Dungeons and Dragons is that at the time when Ravenloft came out, most Dungeons and Dragons was medieval, feudal, very much. And they wanted to do gothic horror, and so it made sense to kind of make Barovia its own pocket dimension, and then the expansion late in second to like bam now there's different dread I'm going to call them dreadlands,
Domains of dread.
Domains of dread, thank you. Yeah, when they added all that, it became muddled at the time, and it was in the splat book glut. So I think that coming back to it now, they're doing a much better job of, here it is, do what you want with it. This is our envisionment, and you run with it.
Yeah. And they get a little bit too into the nitty gritty of, okay, if you're going to have all these different planes, how do you make them work? Like, for example, they have this commentary in here on currency, which is a healthy reminder that coins in the medieval period, as well as our fantasy settings, are based on the metal they're made out of and their weight. So a gold piece isn't just worth a gold piece because it's been stamped by a particular duke. It's worth a gold piece because it weighs the same in gold as every other gold piece. And it doesn't matter what you do with the gold piece. It's a gold piece as long as it's a piece of gold of the appropriate weight.
Yes. I'm big smiling because indoor indoor, there's two things indoor doesn't like. One, that the calendar in D&D is a 10-day, in Faerun is a 10-day, and that in he eliminated Electrum from his game, and then Curse of Strahd brought Electrum back. And so he was like, no, I hate you, Electrum. And so if you ever want to get his goat, you could just bring up 10 days and Electrum pieces.
I don't think I've ever really used Electrum. I usually just multiply the price by 10 and list it in gold pieces.
Yeah, all the old modules had Electrum pieces in them. So,
They're back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but there's some neat stuff in here. Oh, hey, look. Time and dates. Just to be clear, each moon begins with the first day of a full moon cycle. Yeah, it looks like they're working off of they don't do weeks as much as they do months. It's a suggestion, although the domains of dread don't share a unified calendar.
That makes sense.
Well, and again, too, a lot of what we forget with our week is born of the Judeo-Christian standard of 7 days, and then there is a day of rest, and that's an Old Testament thing. So it's gone into both Judaism and Christianity as an expectation, or it also, I think, predates Abraham. So that's why you also see it in the Muslim faith, the idea of every 7 days we have a thing we do.
Right. Yeah.
Which works out almost to a lunar cycle.
Right.
I mean, close enough for government work, right? As long as you don't look too close to it. So some neat stuff there. And then again, some neat ideas to, again, keep fleshing out what you do as you start to write this and lay out your plan for the story. I feel like if your plan is to run something that is really sandboxy, where you're going to throw the players in and say, okay, go forth in my domain and do what you might, I think you're going to find yourself with a lot to do here, because of the nature of the campaign of the book is set up, where it's like, here's just a lot of stuff to do to get ready to start to run your game. Whereas I think if you're a little more of a roller coaster gamer, a little more of here's kind of the story I want you guys to work your way through, it'd be a lot easier to think, okay, these are the bullet points they got to hit every week. These are the major story elements I want to include. This is how I'm going to scare the crap out of them. There's so much in here to work with that you can just keep building on it. The next chapter, and I think we probably should just kind of glance off of it because there's so much to it, is just a cornucopia of preset settings. If Ravenloft as such is not your jam, there's just a whole slew of inspirations to draw from. That, again, it takes up most of the screen real estate in the digital edition of the book, where it's just like, look, here's a whole bunch of domains and what's going on in them and some plot hooks. I was just reading yesterday about the Carnival, a moving domain of dread.
Yeah.
That can show up anywhere.
Was this where Darkon showed up? Or is that
probably
later? There's at some point there's something and
Darkon.
And it's so Darkon became a LARP, like a really, really massive LARP where they have battles and geography and you take land and there's kingdoms and the whole thing. It was really quite big. There's even a documentary out there that if you want to see LARPing in not a good light, look up Darkon.
Ouch.
Yeah, if you are gamers and LARPers, it's fun. It's a good time. You definitely, check it out. But if ever you want to scare someone away from ever LARPing again, show them the Darkon documentary. That's
Got
it's
it.
really all I had to say about specific
Okay.
realms.
Again, I think there's a lot to build on that too. There's so much, and there's a whole section here called the other domains of dread that just take you down another laundry list of basically inspirations.
Yeah.
Have you thought about the Sea of Sorrows,
Hmm.
Island Domains, nautical horror,
Yeah.
and you just get some hooks to kind of play with. And from there we get some background on Keepers of the Feather, which I don't know where they're introduced. I know they have a big part of the Curse of Strahd. They show up there as a major theory, a major group, as well. And the Vistani have been part of Curse of Strahd since the good old days. That's I think there's really no way to get around the idea of Bohemian travelers, or what we used to call gypsies,
Yep.
being just a part of this Eastern European motif. Just as an FYI for those that are with us still, you do want to be careful with this because the Roma throughout Europe have had a real rough go of things. They a lot of assumptions are made. They're often very persecuted just for not being a group that has firm roots in a community by having a house there. They were on the top 5 list for the Nazis. So be very mindful if you bring them into your games that you want to be respectful of the culture, which is a very real, very alive culture today. And just be mindful of it when you bring them into a game, that you're being respectful. If you want to talk about gypsies as such, a better term you might consider using is a Bohemian travelers. It gets you the same ideas, but it removes the words. It makes it a little more palatable, as it were. This is a thing there, but there's some background on them. And they've also, over the years, they've removed the assumption that Vistani are automatically mistrusted,
Ah.
which is probably for the better.
It's one of those things where my cultural brain is that's different. That's cool. Let's see more about that. So but, I always had a hard time thinking of it in a negative light, I guess. So
Yeah. Well, and it gets into the idea of, I think when you automatically label a group as untrustworthy, you start to bump into some headaches. There may be many bands of these Vistani that are untrustworthy, but that's their choice to be untrustworthy.
right.
It's a trait of the individuals or the community of that small sub community, but the overarching people who travel and have a bohemian lifestyle are not inherently trustworthy because of those two choices.
Those awesome choices.
Yeah, there may be other
would
choices that make them untrustworthy, but and then we have a really nice set of stat blocks for all of your favorite NPCs that have come up over the years in various contexts.
Nice.
And some, actually, no stat blocks, just background.
Ah.
They don't give us stat blocks. I was wrong. But some ideas with them. So some really neat stuff in that section. And the last chapter is an adventure. Actually, there's 2 chapters. There's the preparing for horror, and I guess I don't want to rush this part too much, but I'm watching the clock too to make sure we hit our posts.
Yeah.
Chapter 4 has, again, I think, a must-read section on running horror at a game table, complete with things like a horror content survey.
Ooh.
And that's the kind of thing where talking to your players about, what's cool, what's not cool, inviting them to tell you, I am really creeped out by this thing and it's okay to include it, versus I'm really creeped out by this thing, it's not okay to include it.
Yes, never have this.
Yeah. And so, yeah, they even have a whole subsetting called Session 0. Where it's like, all right, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how we're going to run it. Let's be sure that we're available. Make sure we've got things that are going to work for everybody. Even a little, I just caught this coming through here. Small printed text. Be careful about that. Be mindful of that. That might be a distraction to some of your players, which not everyone thinks about.
Yeah, the one that was really good was they have a I forget the name of the company, but they made a player's screen, and the font in it is dyslexic friendly.
Ooh.
And as your neighborhood dyslexic, I really appreciate that. I cannot remember their name. I will try to give them a shout out on Twitter, because they sent me one to look at and play with, and so me and the oldest house elf, she loves it. She loves her little player screen. And yeah, the fonts and stuff, particularly in something like a Gothic horror where you want to do loopy, swirly, cursive and stuff to make it look more period. Yeah, it can. It's just a side note to be mindful of. Mm-hmm. Some people may not even be able to read it.
That loopy, swirly is good for a handout. Mm-hmm. That you want to look period. It's terrible on a player reference.
Yes.
One thing also I want to draw everyone's attention to that I think is really worth pointing out is they have a subheading here called After the Horror, which is another one of those important elements of talking to your players after you've taken them through this ringer. And in theory, every D&D game you should have like a post-game wrap-up. How are we doing? What did we like? Remember, here's my email if there were things you didn't like and you don't want to talk about it now.
Yep.
Here's where you can do it. But especially when you're going to be pushing them narratively to discuss things that are going to creep them out, you want to make sure you're having a chance to like give them a moment to say, I didn't want to be the one that ruined the moment at the table, so I didn't say anything, but I was really not okay that happened to that kid.
Yeah.
Like that one really hit home for me. I didn't think it was going to hit home for me, but it did. And I didn't want to ruin the moment because we were all having a great time, but I really hope that never ever happens again as a person.
Right.
Which is different than my character hopes it never happens again.
Right.
Because that just means you have to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. When your players say, oh, please not again, that's your players telling you that was not an okay place to push.
Yeah. Sora is horribly afraid of phase spiders. Oh, there will be phase spiders. But Dave sitting at the table is horribly afraid of arachnophobic. It is not okay to have phase spiders back again and again.
Yes. And then the book ends on the adventure The House of Lament, which I have taken to reading. And I am going to be running in the very, very near future.
Nice.
It just so happens that my little candles of Candlekeep have decided that they like the horror setting. So it's like, okay, let's torture you a little bit more, my pretties. And it just so happened I've recently acquired a particularly horrific adventure to run with you. So I don't have to write it.
Mm-hmm. Right now, there are flying monkeys leaving Lantern's abode.
More homebrew, please. No, homebrew's work.
No.
My whole point of my Wednesday night games was supposed to be I didn't have to prep anything. I could just run it out of the book. Although I think if you've watched any of Curse of Strahd, I do personalize the daylights out of things, so they practically run like a homebrew.
Yeah.
I don't just read the room descriptions and say, what do you do? Okay, here's the monster, let's kill it. Which this one does not. This one falls into the category of, and I'm just going to blink it here really quick. It has a flowchart that they recommend you follow.
Nice.
Which is separate from the map of the adventure.
Yeah.
Which does here's where everything's located, but there's an arch of here's how to get your rising tension. Here's the climax. Here's the conclusion. So it runs much like I write my homebrew games. And I'm already like starting to salivate at the idea of like putting my little candles through it. And that's what I call them. They're my candles.
The
These little
candles.
bright spots I get to toy with.
Almost blow them out.
Yeah. So, verdicts. Who needs to buy this?
I think it's much more of a DM, like I kind of prefaced. It's much more of a DM book than a player book. I really think that I would if I was a player, I would bits and bobs this in D&D Beyond and buy the parts I'm going to use and want. You know, ooh, I want those 2 subclasses. I want this. There are books out there that I've done that for because I own a hard copy of, and I just want it to work in D&D Beyond. I'm like, okay, I don't need all of mythic stories of Theros or whatever it was. I don't need all of that, but I want to have satyrs and, you know, fae and this and that. So I buy bits and bobs out of it. But if you were a DM, yeah, I can see totally you get this book either in D&D Beyond or, you know, the absolutely gorgeous brick and mortar store copy.
Yeah, so. I'm regretting not picking up the exclusive cover from the brick and mortar store hard copy, because I do think, having looked through it digitally, I am going to want this hard copy for myself. Not just for Dungeons and Dragons, but for all future RPG gaming,
right.
And writing. I think as a writer's guide to horror, this is incredibly well crafted and well sourced, well prepared. These are things you should be asking yourself when you're writing, when you're preparing the stories, or as a player. Like, again, if you're a player with a panache for horror, there's a value in having this, so you're thinking along the same lines as a DM is thinking, so you can co-create a good story.
Right. Yeah, yes, where you can then go, oh, I kind of see where he's headed with this, and help out. You know,
right?
Yes, because you know, there's nothing worse than getting into a story beat and you're like, and they missed the story beat and now they're careening the carriage off the cliff. It really, you know, story wise,
right?
You know, so.
Yeah, but that's the thing too, where it's like being able to think about these horror elements as part of your backstory, as part of your character relationships. I can see a player who's really deep into horror that wants to play with being mind screwed by your DM. These are some good questions to answer, to hand your DM the tools with which the mind fudgery may begin, because that helps them. I mean, we can't be inside your head so much that we know what buttons to push. If you can tell us, hey, here's some buttons you can feel free to push on, and I know myself enough to know this. Go for it.
I'd really like to be haunted by my, you know, dead paramour.
Yeah, you know, and here's a little bit of a basis to you take them the rest of the way. You know, or you decide how they died, and you decide this, and just really mess with me. It'll be fun. It'll be exciting. I won't know what's going on, and that will make it exciting in the moment.
Yeah,
I do tend to agree. For mechanics, if it's stuff you want on your D&D character sheets, bits and bobs is probably the best bet, because there just isn't a lot that's going to be added to D&D Beyond for you with this digital purchase. The homebrew is not that good. The DM is making crap up on the spot because he is not planning it out as well as he could have. Although I appreciate the kind words. I maybe I'm shooting myself further down than I should. I'm not that bad at what I do. I still don't think I'm good enough to charge for it, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I definitely do think as a storyteller and a writer, this is a phenomenal collection of ideas to muse on.
Yeah.
I do think they dedicated probably a little too much space to, here's a whole bunch of pre-written stuff. I think they probably could have cut that middle section of all those domains. They could cut that all out and just left you with a couple of plot hooks and then maybe published an adventure.
Yeah. It really is. Now, 2, I'll say most likely this is the advert. This is the marketing test, whereas everybody's like, ooh, Darkon. Then they'll go, oh, they want that. Here is your adventure for, the this dread realm. Here, this is for that, and so it was a lot like the ancient Greyhawk book. It would give you stats about a country and a blurb about the country, and then they could place adventures in that country, like modules there. Or when they wrote a module, they'd say, well, this would work really good in the, they're all called the Duchy of such and who, or the Scarlet Brotherhood.
Yep.
So
so there's our verdict. We expect to see some adventures in the really popular campaign settings in the near future. So keep an eye for those, as that's our prediction. And if you're a GM, definitely grab it. If you're a player, maybe grab it. If you're a writer, it should already be on your shelf. If you're into writing the fantasy horror genres, or I would even say urban fantasy, you should pick it up, because this will add that tension that Bella and Edward never have.
Right.
What have you got on tap for this week, my friend? What's
I'm
coming
on
up?
vacation this week, but I will be playing Masks on Thursday. I will be Sunday morning doing Griftlands, maybe the final chapter, and we have to decide. I will be putting out when we finish, I will put out a Twitter poll. Twitter poll to find out what we're going to play next. And then back here on Tuesday.
That sounds like fun. I've got Wednesday night is our last game for a month of our Candlekeep Mysteries group. We're going to be off for the rest of June so we have a big conclusion tomorrow night, which hopefully I can match last week's energy. I don't know what's going on this weekend yet. They just came out with a D&D game on Steam called the Celesta or Celesta.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
And it's straight 5th edition. So no matter how bad the game is, I have a ton of stuff to say about it, which makes it great streaming fodder.
Good.
Sunday night, we're back again with the Curse of Strahd. We're in episode 4. And then Monday night next week, before we get together again, I'm hanging out with That Other Pond, who is going to be playing in my Ravenloft one-shot the following weekend. She and I are chilling out and making characters for it. So we're doing we're doing the pre-gens for the weekend's game. We're going to chill out and talk D&D, and hopefully we actually get 6 characters made. I kind of figure we're going to get 2 characters made and spend the rest of the time gabbing about our D&D history. But it should be a lot of fun, because on the 12th, which is a week from Saturday, I'm getting together with the Raven-Armed, the Reluctant Hermit, the Other Pond, and Linarius, and they're going to see the convention version of I6 Ravenloft.
Yeah.
So I'm like so geeked to get all these great gamers to the table. I'm going to start talking about it now.
Fantastic.
So if you've been listening to the podcast, thank you for listening in. We appreciate you being here. Please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts so others can find this great content. Remember, we are a proud partner of the Inverse Genius Network. So if you find any Inverse Genius content, you should check them all out. There's a range of podcasts and video channels talking about board games, role-playing games, video games, VR. They are all over the map. Thank you for downloading the show and for listening in. And Gree, do you have a parting thought for our podcast listeners?
Yes. So if there was an old man who lived in our village, and we thought he was a blood drinker, a Dracula, a vampire, so we stuck a stake in his heart and he died. Hence, we knew he was the vampire.
And on that note, folks, watch out for stakes. Get vaxxed, get masked, stay safe. Everyone who's here on Twitch hanging out with us, thank you for being part of the live stream. It's a lot of fun. We did not talk about monster characters. That is officially now part of next week's mailbag episode. I got to send you somewhere, and I think I'm going to ship you over to, I'm looking to see who's on. Sissy's still going, so maybe we'll head that way. We haven't dropped in on her in a while. Oh, nope. Sophie's still going. We're going to drop in on her. She is a fun peeps. Her other half plays D&D. I'm trying to get her to the game table. So we'll go send you guys over to chill out with her. Gray and I are going to go grab some dinners independently and start prepping for next week. Oh, the mailbag episode.
All right.
So that'll be a lot of fun.
And I have said before, I love monster characters. So pop in so we can talk about it.
That's a half an hour there, and half an hour we got to talk about gods.
Yep.
And that's that, and then whatever else comes in while we're chatting, because I'm sure chat will have opinions. So bring those opinions next week when we get together for another happy hour. Until then, we're gonna sign off. We'll let you have some closing screens, and then the raid will take you on over to check out Sophie. She's an amazing streamer out of Northern Ireland. Give her all of our love and affections.